Welcome. Today is the 9th day of Tammuz, the 15th of July. We're up to the second reading of Parshat Balak. And in today's reading, we have the second encounter between Balaam and the emissaries of Balak. And he tells them, the first set of emissaries, I can't come because God doesn't want me to go. So Balak figures that he needs some more cuddling. So he sends more important emissaries. And Balaam says to them a very famous statement, and we're in Numbers 22:18. Balaam replied to Balak's officials, and he said, even if Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, big or little, contrary to the command of my God. So it seems that he's a very God-fearing man. He won't do anything if God doesn't tell him to do it. However, his wording needs to be looked at more carefully. He says, even if Balak were to give me his entire house filled with silver and gold, meaning, you can learn something from what a person says, even if they say it in the negative. And so Rashi here says about these words, if Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, Rashi writes, this tells us that he was avaricious and covetous of other people's wealth. Between the lines, what you hear is, this is what he's fantasizing about. This is what he wants. It's true that he still has a problem with God, but in his heart, this is what he wants. He's revealing himself. He said, continues Rashi, he ought to give me all his silver and gold. And it's actually a bargain, he says. Why? For behold, he would otherwise have to hire many armies to fight against them, the Israelites. Even then, it is doubtful whether he would conquer, meaning be victorious, or not be victorious against the Israelites. But I, says Balaam, will certainly be victorious. So it's a bargain, actually. It's going to cost him a lot more if he's going to try to go get mercenaries. And there's a whole reason why he's going to have to need mercenaries. He can't take from the local talent. I'm not going to get into that now. Even if he brings all these mercenaries, he's still doubtful whether he will be victorious or not, and it's going to cost him a fortune anyway. He's getting a bargain by paying me his whole house full of silver and gold. This is the basis. It's not that this is where it came from, but this statement, meaning not Rashi is where it came from, but Rashi took from the same source that we're now going to look at. And the source appears in the final chapter of Pirkei Avos, the tractate of the ethics of the fathers, as it's called, or the wisdom of the fathers. And there, in the final chapter, when we have it before us, there are 6 chapters when they put it in the Siddur, but really the tractate only has 5. The final chapter is not from the Mishnah. It's actually a later compilation in the language of the Mishnah. It's taken from different places in the Tosefta and other places. And there it says like this, at the very end, the last Mishnah in chapter 5, which is, as I mentioned, the last chapter, the actual last chapter of Avot, it compares Balaam to Abraham, and it says, whoever possesses these 3 things is of the disciples of Abraham, our father. And whoever possesses 3 other things, he is of the disciples of Balaam the wicked. And what are these 3 things? A good eye, a humble spirit, and a lowly appetite. Or the word for appetite is a good translation, but really it says a lowly psyche, nefesh shfala. So a person like this, who has a good eye, a humble spirit, and a lowly appetite, he is of the disciples of Abraham, our father. An evil eye, a haughty spirit, and a boundless appetite, again, psyche is the right translation, he is of the disciples of Balaam the wicked. Where did we learn that he has an avaricious, boundless, covetous nature to his appetite? We learned it from this verse, that he wants enough gold and silver to fill Balak's palace. That's what he wants. Now, this is a very important Mishnah, and really cuts to the core of what Balaam represents. And as we usually do in these treatments, short treatments of something in the reading, there's an abstraction that we can do here to Abraham's qualities and to Balaam's qualities, and we're going to do two different abstractions. The first one is just going to be a very simple one. Second one's a little bit more complex. The first one is just to say that these three traits that Abraham has, a good eye, he called it humble spirit, and a lowly psyche, a lowly appetite, they correspond to the three festivals of the year. And I want to just take a moment to explain this correspondence. This abstraction was written by the Sfas Emes, the Rebbe of Gur, a few Rebbes back, just before the Holocaust. And he writes like this. He says, a lowly appetite, really the words in Hebrew are a poor nefesh aniyah, like a poor person. That is the bread of poverty that we eat on Passover. So really, a person, when it comes to their appetite, in a certain sense, you have to take what you have on Passover, where you have much less to eat because you're not eating any leavened bread and leavened dough products, and you have to take that lesson and apply it to the entire year, and to say that I'm always satisfied with less. I don't need more. My psyche, meaning my nefesh, the part of me that craves, that wants things, is satisfied and complacent with less. Then you have the humble spirit. The humble spirit is related to the festival of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. What's the humble spirit there? That the Torah can only dwell, as it did on the Mount Sinai, which was the humblest of all mountains, the lowest of all mountains. But also the Torah dwells in a person who has a humble spirit. And humble spirit means that you first of all come and you say, I need the Torah. I need to hear God's words. But then the most interesting one is the good eye. And the good eye is related to the festival of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And the idea there, says the Sfat Emet, is that to have a good eye means to wish good upon other people. Who is able to look at other people and say, I wish they have more? I don't need for myself. I'm of the lowly appetite. But I wish for them much more. And who is this? This is the person who has joy in their life. And the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, is all about Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy. By Passover, it doesn't mention joy at all. By Shavuot, it mentions it once. And then, in relation to Sukkot, there are 2, even 3 times that the Torah mentions joy in relation to this holiday, and it's known as the joy at the time of our joy. Where does this come out, the Ein Tovah, the most? This the Sfat Emet doesn't write, but this is a contribution from Rav Ginsburg. Ein means an eye, but it's also the letter Ein, the 16th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it means also an eye for other people to see good, but its value is 70. So specifically, this is the 70 oxen that were sacrificed on Sukkot in order to bring blessing down to the 70 nations of the world. And that can only be in someone who has joy. That's our first abstraction. We don't have much time, so we're going to have to do the second one much quicker. The Baal Shem Tov, when he teaches this Mishnah, he says, really, the way that it's stated, it's not said that these are the traits of the disciples of Abraham and these are the traits of the disciples of Balaam. What the Mishnah says is, Ma ben talmidav shel Avraham Avinu letalmidav shel Balaam HaRasha. What is the difference between the disciples of our patriarch Abraham and the disciples of Balaam the wicked? The Baal Shem Tov asks a very simple question. He says, what do you mean you can't tell the difference? And this is actually a very deep insight. That in our generation, it's very hard for people to tell the difference between Abraham and Balaam. They can't tell the difference from the behavior. Everything is mixed up. There's no clarity. There's no moral clarity. We know this. This is not something new. But the Baal Shem Tov is saying, how could you not know? He says, no, really you can't know. He's talking about our generations. The Baal Shem Tov sees that we're going into a period where it's going to be very hard for people to tell the difference between the two. So he says the truth is, the reason it's very hard to tell the difference is because they both use the same traits, except they switch them. The good eye, well, let's start from the first one. The lowly appetite, the small appetite. It says, the disciples of Abraham have a small appetite, a lowly appetite when it comes to material wealth, material objects. But the disciples of Balaam have a great appetite, a limitless, boundless appetite for everything that's material, as we saw in our verse here in Numbers 22:18. But it also is switched, which is why you get confused. Because the disciples of Abraham have a tremendous appetite, a boundless appetite for everything spiritual. Whereas the disciples of Balaam have a lowly appetite when it comes to anything spiritual. So you see that the Mishnah, says the Baal Shem Tov, is talking about the material world. And when you look at the spiritual world, they flip. And they really trade places. And that's part of the source of the confusion. The same is true about the humble spirit versus the haughty spirit. The humble spirit, says the Baal Shem Tov, when it comes to the disciples of Abraham, they have a humble spirit. They approach everything material with a humble spirit. But when it comes to something spiritual, the material, they're humble. When it comes to something spiritual, they know that they have a task to teach the world. They can't be humble. So it's true that for them to learn, they have to be humble. But when the time comes and they need to instruct, they have to be of a haughty spirit. They can't come and use false humility and say, I don't know. I have nothing to say about this. It's not true. They have a lot to say about this. And in fact, the world suffers when they don't speak out. By the students of Balaam, the disciples of Balaam, it's exactly the opposite. When it comes to the material, they have a haughty spirit. They want everything. But they want their honor. They want to be honored. They want to be recognized. When it comes to something spiritual, they have no such interest. And finally, when you come to the good eye, it's also the same thing. I leave that for you to think about how that would work. And with this, we end today's observations about this very important verse and the Rashi on it. And I invite you to join us tomorrow also. Thank you for joining.